Chapter 13. Accusations. When we turned into Grandma Olivia's driveway and came to a stop, I sat quietly while I tried to catch my breath. Confronting Grandma Olivia was always difficult, but this was going to be twice as hard, and the anticipation made my heart race. "Are you all right?" Holly asked. "Yes, you don't have to wait for me," I said. "I might be here a while." "But how will you get home?" "Grandma Olivia's driver will take me, I'm sure." I gazed at the house. Despite the bright sunshine glittering on the windows, the beautiful rainbow-colored flowers and perfectly trimmed hedges, the house looked dark and full of foreboding to me. Holly sensed my tension. "Maybe she's not home. Maybe nobody's home," Holly said. "I'll wait for her," I said, in a tone of voice that indicated I would wait forever if need be. Holly gazed at me and then at the house. She squinted, closed her eyes, and then opened them and nodded as if she had reached a conclusion. "There's a lot of static here, a bed of bad, negative energy. Remember what I told you about my friend who went to India and walked on a bed of hot coals?" "Yes," I smiled, recalling the story and how animated Holly had been when she told it. "You've got to build a wall between yourself and that which can hurt you, Melanie. You have the power in your own mind. Rely on your concentration. Focus." "I'm doing just that," I said. "Thank you." I got out. She remained in the driveway, watching me walk up to the front door. I pushed the buzzer and waited, then pushed it again. Holly was still in the driveway, unwilling to leave me here. Finally, Loretta, the maid, came to the door. I looked back and waved to Holly to indicate it was all right. Reluctantly, she backed out. I didn't want to send her away, but I knew that if she came into the house with me, Grandma Olivia might use her as an excuse to refuse to talk to me. I was determined. She wasn't going to find any avenue of escape from the truth this time. "Hello, Loretta," I said. "Is she here?" "Mrs. Logan is upstairs in her bedroom. She wasn't feeling well today. I just brought her a little lunch, but she didn't eat much." "I have to speak to her," I insisted. "She's in her bedroom," Loretta said, intending that I take that as the reason why I couldn't. She was a tall, thin woman with a face that looked as if it was made from porcelain and would crack and shatter if she smiled or laughed. "People talk in their bedrooms," I said, and marched past her. "Oh, but Mrs. Logan doesn't want to be disturbed," she cried. "No one wants to be disturbed, Loretta," I replied and started up the stairway. I had been upstairs only once before, when Carrie had given me a quick look at a tour of the house. But I had seen Grandma Logan's bedroom. I remember she had a bed next to a wide, dark cherry wood 3-door nightstand that sat a huge Tiffany lamp. Behind the bed were 2 big windows, over which hung sheer wine-colored drapes. The bed was on a matching oval area rug. To the right was a cherry wood desk, and to the left, adjacent to the door, were the closets and dressers, a very uncomfortable-looking spindle chair, and a side table. The walls were covered with light brown paper, and what looked like tiny flowers stenciled around the borders. I saw no paintings on the wall and thought the room was rather cold for a bedroom. At the moment the door was closed, I knocked and waited, and then knocked again. "What is it?" I heard Grandma Olivia cry with sharp annoyance. Rather than answer and announce myself, I just opened the door. My appearance was almost as shocking to her as hers was to me. She was sitting up, her face covered with some sort of milk-white facial cream. Her watery red eyes peered out of the mask of lotion, and her bland lips looked like a line drawn with a broken crayon. Her blanket was folded back at her waist, surrounded by her oversized pillows. her thin hair down and her egg-shell white silk nightgown loosely clinging to her bony shoulders. She appeared smaller than she did when dressed and moving around in large rooms. The portion of her chest that usually remained covered now revealed age spots and tiny moles. Minus her jewelry and hair combs and wearing this skin lotion, she looked naked, vulnerable, caught unprotected by her wealth and power, a queen without her crown. My seeing her like this filled her face with immediate rage. She stuttered and gasped before she could get out the angry reprimands. How dare you come up here without being announced? Who do you think you are barging into my bedroom? Where do you get the audacity? Haven't you learned anything about manners? She reached over the bed to fetch a towel to wipe the cream off her face, whipping her eyes back at me as she did so. There was so much fire coming from them that if I had been made of ice, I would have been a pool of water in seconds. I just came from visiting Grandma Belinda, I said in response. She threw the towel to the floor and pulled her blanket up until she was covered to her neck. Where's Loretta? Did she permit you to enter this house? Don't blame Loretta. She told me you were up here and I insisted on coming to see you. Well, you just turn yourself around and march back down those stairs and out of this house. I'm not entertaining guests today. I have a splitting headache, a sinus problem, and I'm not here to be entertained, Grandma Olivia. I'm here to confirm the truth once and for all, I fired back. Her eyes widened as her anger peaked. How dare you speak to me like that? And with all this family trouble now too, poor Jacob and Aunt Sarah having to contend with Jacob's heart attack, and now your insolence? I warned you about your behavior. I told you. I said I have come here from seeing Grandma Belinda, I interrupted, raising my voice just enough to grab her attention. She stared a moment, her lips pursed. What of it? She demanded. First, I was told that you left orders for no one to see her. I began in a smaller, quieter voice. That's correct. Why? I asked, and I took a step toward her. I don't think I have to explain myself to you, and I will not be cross-examined in my own home. Get out, she said, pointing to the door. I'm not leaving until I hear the truth from your lips. It may burn your tongue, but I want to hear it, I said. My calmness fanned the flames of her rage even more. Her mouth opened and closed without a sound emerging, and she choked on her own fury. Grandma Belinda was not in good health, I said. She's under some medication that's turning her into a zombie. Oh, so you've become a doctor too, is that it? You want to go up there and tell them how to treat their patients? Is that what you've come bursting into my home for? She added with a cold smile. This is exactly why I left orders for no visitors. She's not well. She's not up to visitors anymore. And I'm disappointed that you were permitted to see her. I'll have a stern talk with Mrs. Green. Mrs. Green knew that if she didn't permit me to see my grandmother, she would have a bigger fight on her hands with me than she would have with you, I said. Oh, so you pushed your way in there just as you've done now, is that it? You think I'm going to tolerate this sort of behavior? You think just because my son is in the hospital that I won't call Sarah and tell her to throw you out on the street? Don't you know that it's only because of my generosity that I permit you to live here? By all rights, you should be in some foster home until they find a family strong enough to stomach you, she spit back at me. I'm not going to be intimidated by your threats this time, Grandma Olivia. If you threw me out to the streets, I would go down to Providencetown newspapers and tell them about this family and the dark secrets. She laughed. Do you think anyone in Providencetown would do anything to upset me? She challenged. You don't know how ridiculous you sound. Now do as I say, and Grandma Belinda told me the truth about my mother's birth, I blurted. I didn't add that she had babbled to what sounded like insane rambling. She told me that she was kept shut upstairs in the house and not even provided proper medical care in the hope that she would lose the baby. She told me how you made her deliver her own baby. What? That's preposterous. I don't think it requires a response. And then she told me who the father was. My mother's father, my grandfather, I added. Grandma Olivia seemed to sink a little in her bed. She leaned back against the pillows, her ashen face almost transparent now. Then she brought the corners of her mouth into her cheeks, thinning her lips so they looked like strings of pale pink. Which one of her many lovers did she call the father of her baby this time? She added. She said it was Judge Childs. Grandma Olivia's lips trembled and then broke into another very forced, hard smile. Oh, she's gone back to that story, has she? Last year it was Samuel, and before that it was Martin Donnelly, a policeman who died 2 years ago. Once it was Stafford Jackson, Teddy Jackson's father. I told you not to go up there and see her anymore. I knew she was going to tell you these ludicrous stories one after another. She's always been a liar, always fantasizing about this or that man. Belinda never had more than 1 foot of reality, in reality most of the time, not even a toe. She's always doing terrible things and making up stories. In her deranged mind, she thought the wealthiest, most handsome men in Providencetown were going to rush off and marry her. Nothing was further from the truth. She was crazy even before she began drinking and sleeping around. All that just put her over the top, and after she gave birth, she went completely mad. Why, if I hadn't had the judge's help at the time... The judge's help? Yes, that's why she's making up the story now. It was Judge Childs who came to my aid and helped me place her in the home where she was treated well and where she could live comfortably in her madness up until now. I needed his political influence. You can imagine the wait list for that place. That's why she accuses him of such a thing. She wagged her head and then nodded. Belinda's getting worse. I didn't know how bad things were until very recently, and that's why I left the orders for her not to have visitors. Satisfied? Now that you know all the nitty-gritty dirt I've been trying to keep swept out of sight? She leaned forward, strengthened by the venom of her lies. For what I could tell, she was lying. We are one of the most respected and well-known of the original families here, she continued. Reputation is as important as money in the bank. Despite the unfortunate circumstances surrounding Belinda and your mother, I was able to protect my family. Now, after we've been overly generous and permitted you to live amongst us, giving you opportunities, you continue to threaten our peace and well-being. How dare you come in here with your accusations? I shut my sister up pregnant? I didn't live. I didn't give her medical assistance? What do you think I'm doing now? But that's what she told me, I said, weakening. She laughed again and shook her head. So you will go around and tell people what a deranged, mentally ill woman who's been institutionalized for years said? This is what you come running here for? This is how you threaten me? Please, she said, wagging her head and waving her hand as if she were chasing away flies. Go home and try to be some assistance to my son's wife during this time. If you can't, well, we'll see to making some other living arrangements for you, she said, but not as a threat, more as a logical conclusion. I stepped back. Was I wrong? Was Grandma Belinda just fantasizing? Oh, why couldn't the truth be plain as day? Why was everything to do with this family so cloudy and confused? Was it like that in all families? Grandma Olivia leaned back and moaned. You've made my head pound again. Please send Loretta up immediately. I need her to get me more of my medicine, she said in a thin, breathless voice. Where is it? I'll get it, I offered. I'd rather do without and suffer, she retorted. Just send Loretta up on your way out. She thought for a moment and sat forward again. How did you get in here? A friend brought me. A friend? Is your friend downstairs too? Is my house full of strangers? No, I sent her away. And how do you intend to get home then? Go walking on the highways? So I hear about it? I thought maybe if Raymond was here. He's not. He's running errands. And of course Samuel's down at the docks, wasting time with fishermen. Damn your insolence, she muttered. Hand me my pocketbook. I'll give you taxi fare, she said. I don't need your money. I've been working and I have my own, I said. Suit yourself. Actually, that's good. I'm glad you have some independence. I have a feeling you're going to need it. Go downstairs and call your taxi and take yourself and Belinda's idiocy home, she ordered. She fell back against her pillow and put her hand over her forehead. Loretta, she cried. I turned and went out the door. Loretta must have been waiting at the bottom of the stairs, for she heard Grandma Olivia's cry and was already coming up quickly. I told you not to go up, she said. I told you. Now she'll be furious at me. She glared angrily at me as we passed each other on the stairs. I hurried down and went to the phone kitchen, where the telephone numbers for various services were posted on the wall. I found a number for a taxi cab company called for the car. Then I went out to the front and sat on the stone bench and waited. As I sat there, I thought about Grandma Belinda. She didn't seem mean enough to make up a story about Judge Childs just to get back at him. How I wish there was someone else to talk to, someone who'd been around at that time. Grandpa Samuel was there, but he wouldn't contradict Grandma Olivia. That was certain. There was no point in asking him anything. I longed to be with people like Papa George and Grandma Arlene again, people who had no lies, who didn't connive and plot against people they supposedly loved. I longed for people who meant what they said, people who didn't hide behind innuendos and double meanings, whose pasts weren't cloaked in shadows, simpler people who wore their hearts on their sleeves and whose smiles had nothing behind them but love and affection. They weren't rich and they didn't have to be in big luxurious homes. They had no political power and influence. No one feared them, but they were more content and they could sleep with crystal clear consciences. Everyone had some regrets, some choices they wished they hadn't made. Everyone's life was stained with mistakes and blotched with sadness, but simple, honest people had more smiles, more laughter in their hearts. Their wealth wasn't as easy counted, but it was there, and I longed to be with them again. Maybe I really should leave, I thought. Maybe I should welcome being thrown out into the street. Grandma Olivia's threats could be rewards in my way of thinking. The taxi arrived and I got in quickly. The driver was an older man with curly gray hair and a round red face. Where to, miss? He asked. I thought for a moment. Do you know Judge Childs? I asked. Nelson Childs? Sure do. Everyone who's lived here most of his life knows the judge, miss. Good. You know where he lives then? Sure. Post Hill Road, about a mile from here. You can't miss his house. It's one of the biggest on the Cape. Is that where you want me to take you? He asked. I hesitated. Yes, I said firmly. That's where I want to go. Then we'll pull up the anchor and set sail, he said, and we turned and left instead of right, which was the way back home. The jolly old taxis was full of questions, but if he had hoped to make a meal out of my answers, he was going to starve. I answered everything with yes, no, or maybe. And when it came to being closed-mouthed, I had many models to learn from in this New England community. Post Hill Road was paved on the street that turned for a quarter of a mile or so up the rise and toward the beach. There were only 2 other homes on the street, both small Cape Cod houses, but the judge's home was a true New England mansion. even more impressive than Grandma Olivia and Grandpa Samuel's home. "You know this is a historical house, don't you?" the taxi driver asked. "No. The judge brought it for a song, and then he and his wife restored it. It's even been featured in a few magazines. My wife knows all about that stuff," he added. "It's a 3-story colonial," he said as we drew closer. The house had been restored in a weathered gray cladding and had a semi-color entry porchway. Which made it more unusual was its large octagonal cupola. The driveway was circular. Like Grandma Olivia and Grandpa Samuel's ground, the lawn was pampered and designed with fountains, walkways, and small rock gardens, but there was almost twice as much acreage here. When we entered the circular drive, I looked off to the right and saw the dock, the moored sailboat and motorboat, and some small dinghies. Just behind the house was a large gazebo and another area for flowers where I saw a swing set under a large maple tree. The judge's car was in front of the garage, so I felt confident he was home. "How much will it cost you to have you wait for me?" I asked the taxi driver. "How long?" "About 20 minutes, I said. He shrugged. "I have to charge you another $15 for a half hour or part of," he replied. "That's fine," I said and got out. I think he would have waited for nothing, just to satisfy his curiosity. He didn't take his eyes off me as I stepped out and went to the front door to ring the bell. I heard a deep ding-dong sound on the inside and waited. Moments later, a short, balding man who looked to be in his early 60s opened the door. He wasn't dressed like a butler or a servant. He wore a white shirt opened at the collar and a pair of dark slacks. The small ridges of gray hair resembled steel wool over the sides of his head. He had a caramel complexion with dark brown eyes, and his nose was thick at the bridge, and his lower lip was fuller than his upper. He took a pair of wire-rimmed glasses from his top pocket and placed them slowly over his eyes to gaze out at me. They magnified his eyes and made them look even rounder. Without speaking, he looked over to the taxicab, then turned back to me. "Didn't hear you drive up," he said. "How can I help you?" "My name's Melanie Logan. I'd like to see Judge Childs," I said. "Judge expecting you?" he asked. He seemed astounded by my visit. Did the judge ever have people calling on him? "No, but he asked me to drop by when I had the opportunity," I replied. "That's so," he said, and I stood there, chewing on the idea for a moment. Then he shook his head. "He don't usually see people unless they have an appointment with him," he added. "Can you please tell him I'm here?" I asked, not hiding my impatience. He didn't move. "He might be napping in the den. That's where he usually does if you don't go someplace on Sunday. He falls asleep there and reads the papers." "I have a taxi cab waiting for me," I pointed, "and so he would appreciate the time he's wasting." He nodded. "Yeah, okay, I'll go check." He started to close the door on me. "I suppose you could wait inside." He stepped aside so I could enter. He closed the door. "Be right back," he promised, and started down the short corridor. The only illumination in the entryway had been in the living room on my right, and it came from the sunlight that penetrated the windows with their curtains drawn back, but I could see some decorative wooden ornaments applied to the walls in the corridor. There were paintings on the walls as well, but I didn't think any of them were Kenneth's. They weren't his style. They were original oils depicting colonial scenes, realistic with subdued colors, all set in thick, ornate frames. All the furniture looked antique, as if it had come with the house, and it too had been restored. I felt as if I stepped into a museum or one of those reconstructed homes open to tours. It didn't feel lived in, warm. Yet, from somewhere deep in the house came music I recognized. I listened hard, and I recalled it from music class. It was Debussy's Les Murs. Moments later, the balding man appeared, followed by Judge Childs, dressed in a maroon satin robe with matching slippers. His hair was a little disheveled, and he drew closer. I saw he hadn't shaved. His eyes were somewhat bloodshot, and he looked flushed, as if he'd been jolted out of a deep sleep. "Melanie, my dear, what a wonderful surprise," he said, holding out his hands. "When Martin told me the beautiful young lady was visiting, I thought he was joking." "You did right to wake me, Morton," he told his butler. "I didn't mean to disturb you," I said. "Oh, nonsense. Old men like myself need to be disturbed. Otherwise, they would just waste away musing about their glorious lost youth. How about something to drink? A lemonade, perhaps?" "That would be fine," I said. "Morton, we'll be in the sitting room," the judge said. "2 lemonades, if you please." "Very good, Judge." "My maid, Toby, is off today," he explained. "This way, my dear," he said, moving toward the room to our right. When we entered, he rushed over to turn on the lamps. "Please have a seat," he said, indicating the strange-looking bench to his right. I hesitated. "Oh, you can sit on it," he said with a smile. "It's actually comfortable." "I've never seen anything like it," I said. "Neither had I until my wife bought it at an auction in Boston. It's called an Empire Hall bench. It was made around 1810. Most everything in this house is antique of one way or another. Our furnishings are quite electric, as an artwork. My wife made this house her life. She would rush off for hours, go miles and miles if she heard there was an auction or a sale of antiques. And New England has an antique shop or an auction every 10 feet, the judge remarked. "I swear." He sat in a high-back ordinate gold chair with a red cushion back and red seat. He looked uncomfortable because the chair was small, but he didn't complain. "But I'll say this for her. She never bought something and didn't put it to use. No showcase furnishing for her. We had to use it all. Wait until I show you the dining room. The table is from the early 18th century. Baroque style, I think. I can't remember it all. Anyway," he rattled on, "you came here to see where Kenneth got his first education in art, architecture, and the like?" "I blamed his mother for that," he said. "He's a wonderful artist, though, isn't he?" "Yes, I guess he is. People do pay large sums of money for his work." "Ah, here's our lemonade," he said as Morton returned with the 2 tumblers on a silver tray. "The glasses are contemporary, but that tray—" "What about that tray, Morton?" "French, 1857, Morton recited. "There, you see, Morton knows it all. He drove my wife everywhere in those days, didn't you, Morton?" "Yes, sir." "Morton's been with me, 40 years now, Morton?" 42 in 4 months, Judge." Judge Childs laughed. "What a memory. I depend on Morton for all my dates and responsibility now, don't I, Morton?" "I do my best, Judge." That he does. "Well, drink up." "Thank you, Morton." "Yes, sir," Morton said and left. Don't know where I'd be without him. When I lost my wife, I lost myself. I didn't know where my own medicine was kept. "So," he said, his eyes shifting to me, "you came to visit, didn't you? How did you get here, by the way?" "Taxi cab," I said. "I have him waiting." "Oh, that's terrible, unheard of. Let me take care of that," he said. He started to get up. "It's all right, Judge Childs." No. Martin will drive you home. I don't want any taxi cab driver hanging about." "It'll only be a moment," he insisted and left. I heard him whisper to Morton in the hallway, and then I heard Morton go out. "I have to pay him," I said, as soon as the judge appeared. "That's taken care of, my dear. I'm honored that you came to visit. The least I can do is take care of the cab driver. Now then, how's Jacob?" "I should have asked you that first thing," he said, returning to his seat. "He's doing well and might have might come home very soon, maybe even tomorrow. That's wonderful. He sipped his lemonade. Yes, I have antiques that would make a museum curator's mouth water, he continued. He seemed to be driven to talk, nervous. It suddenly occurred to me that Grandma Olivia might have called him and told him the gist of my conversation with her. You know, I've been visiting my Grandma Belinda, I began. Oh, he said, nodding. I do think Olivia mentioned that. Yes. How's Belinda doing? Haven't you visited her yourself, Judge Childs? I asked. Me? Oh, not for some time, he said. Why, did she say that I was there? Yes. He laughed. Oh, poor Belinda. Even before she was, disturbed, she had a problem with reality, he said. It sounded like a line he and Grandma Olivia had rehearsed. But you have visited her. Oh, sure. You see that painting there? He nodded to the large portrait on the wall behind me. My wife found that at a sale just outside Henesia's port. Bought it for $250. Turns out it was the original, probably worth $10,000, if it's worth a penny. She was good at making finds like that. So he said, without taking a breath, how's your fiddle playing? I put the lemonade down slowly on the small marble table beside me. Morton had left a wooden coaster that looked as if it too were some sort of antique. Then I turned to the judge. My silence made him swallow hard. He stared a moment, then nodded softly. This isn't just a casual visit, is it? You came here to ask me something specific, didn't you? Yes, sir, I said. I think you know what it is, too, I said. He nodded again and put his own glass down and took a deep breath, closing his eyes and opening them. You sure you want to ask me these questions, he said. Yes. I know everyone here tells me there's no point in stirring up the past, that it just brings a lot of pain into a lot of people. But I grew up believing I was one person. Then I found out in a hard and shocking way that I was someone else. That people I loved and trusted all my life were lying to me about the most basic thing of life. Me. My identity, I said. The judge nodded. When you get to be as old as I am, you look back on your life and it seems as if you've led two different lives. I was a wild young man. I never did much of what would make my parents ashamed. I never did much that would make my parents ashamed, and I did do a lot of stuff that made them proud. Funny thing is if you've had good parents and you've loved them and known they loved you, even after they're dead, you worry about doing things that would make them ashamed. I guess that's what people mean when they say you can live on in your children. I don't know both my parents, I said. I may never know who my real father is, but I know my mother, and now I know my grandmother. Are you my grandfather? I asked bluntly. He stared at me. Grandma Olivia doesn't want me to know the truth, but I think she has her own private reasons for that. He smiled. You're a bright young woman. Any man would be proud to call you his granddaughter. Are you that man? I pursued. He brought his head back and gazed up at the ceiling. When he lowered his head, his eyes were glassy with tears. I held my breath. My Louise knew, but she was too much of a lady to ever bring it up, he said. And you should have seen her around Haley. She never made that girl feel unwanted. Hers was a heart so full of charity and love, it could forgive Judas. Oh, I could say I drank too much in those days. I could blame it on the bourbon, or I could say Belinda was beautiful and enticing, which she was, but in the end, I have to bear the burden for my own sins. Then you are my mother's father, and therefore my grandfather. Yes, he said. He shook his head and smiled. Look how simple it is to say now. Maybe because I'm looking at you and I see the pain. I can't lie in the face of that. At least I can't now, he said. I never had to lie to Louise. She never came right out and asked me, he said. Isn't that wonderful? I didn't deserve her. Did my mother ever know? Yes, but not until she was much older. Actually, not long before she got herself into trouble and she and Chester left Providencetown. You mean pregnant with me? He nodded. I think I suddenly need something stronger than this, he said, holding up his lemonade. If you'll excuse me a moment. He rose and went to the cabinet and took out a bottle of Tennessee whiskey. He poured himself half a glass and drank most of it in a gulp. Fortifies the courage, he exclaimed, and poured himself another and stood by the window. How did she find out? I asked. I had to tell her eventually. When I discovered she and Kenneth were getting too serious about each other, it broke my heart to do it, but under the circumstances, I had no choice. He turned looking as if he'd aged years in minutes. They both resented me for it, especially Kenneth. Yes, he said, bowing his head in sorrow. It's terrible enough when a son learns his father was unfaithful to his mother, but when that infidelity steals away the woman that he loves, the pain is far more a chasm it creates between the father and son. Well, it would be easier to step across the Grand Canyon than bridge the gap that's grown between me and my son. I'm afraid. I'll take that to my grave. Why was my grandmother locked away in that place? I asked, my eyes narrow with suspicion. Judge Childs shifted his eyes away guiltily and gazed out at the window as he spoke. I never approved of how Belinda was treated during her pregnancy. Olivia was embarrassed about it, of course, and kept her out of sight, literally a prisoner in her home. I wasn't the one to complain for obvious reasons, although I did express as much disapproval as I could. In short, the pregnancy, the imprisonment, her history of promiscuity, drinking, they all took a toll, and she became rather disturbed after Haley's birth. We consulted with a doctor, a physician friend of mine, who recommended an institutionalized setting. In the beginning, I hoped it would be temporary, but it went on and on. Because that was what Grandma Olivia wanted, her embarrassment shut away. He looked at me, then lowered his eyes with shame. You have to understand my predicament at the time. I was married, I had children. Kenneth had recently been born. I was in politics. She threatened you. If you didn't cooperate, she threatened you, I concluded. He didn't deny it. Ironically, it might have been the best thing for Belinda anyway. I did visit her whenever it was possible. To ease your conscience, I accused, my eyes fixed unflinchingly on him. He returned my gaze and shook his head. When you look at me like that, you resemble Olivia more than Belinda. I could never hide my weakness from her, nor my shame. I know Olivia holds you in higher regard than you think, he added. It's like being complimented by the devil. Oh, she's not all that bad. She's had a difficult life, and she's done well. She's actually been Samuel's strength. He owes his success to her. I know. She lets everyone know how indebted they are to her, especially me, I muttered. I looked up at him again sharply. Since I first visited Grandma Belinda, Grandma Olivia had them give Belinda medicine that keeps her in a daze, and she tried to keep me from visiting. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, you do now. He nodded. I'll see that it stops, he promised. Somehow, someone should make it possible for her to come home, I said, tears in the corners of my eyes. Yes, he said in a tired, defeated voice. Only where is her home now? Where she is, I'm afraid, he replied to his own question. Maybe someday I'll be able to make a home for her. Maybe you will, he agreed. First, I have to find my own home, I said. I want to know who my real father is. If I knew, I would tell you, but Haley never confided anything intimate to me. I just know it's not Kenneth, thank God. What a mess that would have been. Sins of the father, he muttered and shook his head. For what it's worth, he added, as I started to turn away, my home is always open to you. I thought about this and then just nodded without a reply. I wish there was some way I could earn your forgiveness, Melanie, he said. It's not my forgiveness you need. Unable to look at me, he finished the whiskey in his glass. I've got to go home, I said. Of course, I'll fetch Morton. We walked out to the hallway. Do you think, he began, there'll ever be a time when you can look at me as your grandfather? For as long as I've known you, you've pretended it wasn't true. I know, and I regret it, he said. So do I replied. I suppose it comes down to who regrets it more. He smiled. When it comes to regrets, I have the edge. I softened my eyes. He did look like a broken, remorseful old man for a moment. I felt pity more than anger. Anger was a sword, sharp and hot, but it also burned and cut a person who held it with a vengeful grasp. What's Grandma Olivia going to do when she learns that you've told me the truth, I asked. He thought about this and then smiled. Pretend I didn't, he said, which brought a smile to my face too. Then he leaned forward and kissed me on the cheek. I'm glad you came here today, Melanie, he said. Morton will be right with you. I stepped out and took a deep breath. My lungs felt full of hot air, enough to make me explode. From practically every point around this house, there was a good view of the ocean. The front steps were no different. I saw a sailboat bucking in the waves, the ocean spray shooting up around it, its sails full of wind. It was too beautiful here to plant a garden of lies. Eventually, the ocean, like time itself, would wash them away and leave us with the naked truth on the beach. I wasn't as afraid of tomorrow as I had been of yesterday. In fact, I looked forward to it.